Hello again, I'm Greg. I want to welcome you to another short series I thought I might do, which will help both writers, readers, and others who sort of think about, entertainment fiction and all of us who are consumers thereof. And this is about the concept of the hero. Okay, this is sort of going in a little bit more of a literary, um, prosodic kind of angle than Joseph Campbell went. Although I admire Joseph Campbell, obviously he is in his own sort of way a hero for some, and of course he is the brain, if you will, behind the original Star Wars series, and the famous series with Joseph Campbell was filmed at the Lucas Ranch, so there that connection sort of sustained itself over the years past the advent of those original films. A four-parter this time, and this first one talks about the hero's inner journey. And that journey is about moving from a persona to an actual person. So the attainment of personhood is the first kind of challenge, the first intimate and interior conflict of the hero concept. So let's take a little look at that, and then we're going to move on to think about how the concept of the hero has changed, sometimes quite radically, over perhaps the past 6,000 years or more, and how it has morphed into a much more modern cast, including obviously female heroes, heroines, who are kind of the main staple now for much entertainment fiction. We'll also take a look at some of the villains along the way, as well as, on top of all of the rest of this, some abstractions, abstract forces as villains that are either personified or remain somehow amorphous. All of that is part of our story. So, the hero's inner journey from persona to person. Among the first known heroes is Gilgamesh, the demigod and ruler of Sumerian Uruk. Though he shares many adventures with his companion Enkidu, his ultimate quest is that of immortality. Utnapishtim, who can be seen as a precursor to Sophia, wisely warns Gilgamesh to turn away from all worldly things, as they have the tendency not only to corrupt people, but as well the earth itself. The earliest mythic cycles still extant tell us of a mourning process that associated with the change in mode of production from subsistence or hunting and gathering to agrarianism. Even at this point, wherein sedentism and social stratification were themselves youthful and novel, our consciousness could make the comparison, already out of mortal memory, between how people lived in that present and how they had formerly existed. The pith of the mythic manner by which this mourning dynamic unfolds is that of an idealization whose linchpin is immortality. It is both the prerequisite for paradise and its outcome. There is a garden in Gilgamesh, as well as, of course, a flood. There is an ark, and there is a covenant. And as status, wealth, and monument took over the lifeways of the Near East, India, and China, we find an increasing effort to immortalize the concept of immortality. It is held in a place rather than a specific being. But this place is not primarily geographical, but perhaps could be called topological, a space which differs qualitatively from both the world and the other world. It is a liminal region wherein all those who have had direct experience of death may be resurrected over against the world, but also with not presuming upon the other world, since no one originally hailing from there would have died in the instance. Gilgamesh is thus part human, part god, and in partaking of both, he not only appears as the archetype for all such beings thereafter, including Jesus Christ, but is moved in the direction of Godhead, away from mortality and thus as well taken from the world and its autothanatic dangers. The form of being to be found in myth varies along these lines. How much of the divine is within the hero, and how much of the human? Cleaving to one's fate is thus a leitmotif. The failed hero is too human, including Achilles, but the successful one finds a way to mitigate their humanity as well as see in it its spark of divinity, as does the Buddha. But the hero brings a radical loom into the mill of the fates. He presumes to make his own destiny. This is due to his uniqueness, at least in his own imagination. There have been other heroes, to be sure, but none like myself, he proclaims. In this, the persona of the hero has its incipient personhood. It is a lengthy journey from Gilgamesh, through Orpheus, then Jesus, to our own fictional characters. But what remains in place is the sense that humanity requires of itself not only a standard bearer, but an overcomer, the one to whom the past is but a dead weight upon the present, and that carrying such a burden obviates any possible future. The hero fights for the day, but lives for the morrow. Thus, the anti-hero is the one who only defends the past. In a period such as our own, wherein the anti-hero seems to be in the ascendant, it is sage to reflect upon how this past was originally understood. The notion of again, used vapidly in contemporary popular politics since it refers to nothing specifically historical, is yet a profound echo of the first sense of what was then. Every again is a nod to the garden, the space of immortality from which humans were ejected when we ourselves gained the maturity to understand our own humanity. That this knowledge, both of good and of evil, precluded the inexistential state of unknowing necessary for time, capital T, to be present, is to be understood as the beginning of history itself. Okay, so that's a really important point, right? The expulsion, as it's called in the Judaic texts, in the Judaic mythology, is not just sort of a, okay, you guys suck, you're out of here type of moment. It's really the difference between time and history. Okay, history begins with the expulsion. It is within the passage of the times, which can occur only in a world and not another world, that the hero thence appears. He carries the banner of the species zeitgeist, a mortal creature and child of history and language, and not one immortal, one who was never a child, and one needing no hermeneutic. His is the sword of vision, yes, but his shield is that which folds in upon itself. The shield recognizes the reality of the world as it is, whilst the sword seeks to change that reality. Since it is uncommonly difficult to share a vision, for it itself has no authority over any but the visionary, it is through deeds alone that the hero convinces others, not of his status, but rather of his cause. Such acts may consist of miracle, magical conjuring, wit, martial art, or simple leadership into the breach, but whatever their precise content, the hero learns that he not only is possessed of the power, it can only be so possessed through its consistent use. To let the heroic stagnate is to make the hero himself moribund, and so it is to action, ever action, that the hero must be called, and thenceforth call himself. This too fits the bill. On the one hand, without conflict, there is no story. But on the other, and just so, the anti-hero seeks stasis, and in his villainous quest, even by means of regression, the antagonist twists the original meaning of again in order to marshal the same emotions, loss and mourning, to his backward cause. The hero, too, is tempted by this movement, whether in the wilderness, which is the devil's quarter acre, or in his own loneliness. How many of our detectives, in our modern melodramas, have recently lost a spouse, or never yet had one? Or we as viewers may endure this loss, occurring early in the narrative, as to promote the sensibility that the hero must fight solo, for he is, after all, the chosen one. It is of the utmost that in our imagination the hero is singular. Beyond gender or age, the specific adventures undertaken, or even if the effort is critical and satirical, as it is in Don Quixote, the hero is a lone and fragile force who seeks to become a force of nature. Gradually, however, a companion for the hero emerges. At first, she is herself ethereal and inconsistent, a muse-like figure who may even be Sophia. Then a true character, such as Enkidu, is present for part of the journey, though not its whole. This companion represents the earthly side of heroism. The hero undertakes the journey to some extent as a gift to the companion and his peers. Then the hero gains a small following, disciples or acolytes, who are not so much a team who can actually aid the hero in his quest, but rather the likes of a cheer squad, more or less sycophantic. Still farther along, the hero's companion becomes more intimate and themselves more singular. Patroclus is a fair example, or Timothy. At some further point, yet more recent to our own time, the companion begins to act as a foil. His is the statement of realism, as was Sancho Panza's, or even the voice of reason and justice to the hero's sometimes too passionate lines, such as Brunhilde was for Siegfried. With this movement from sidekick to partner, to be almost found in Wagner, We have a sense that heroism is no longer the exclusive preserve of the soloist, mostly male and mostly youthful. Even so, the energy of youth must be called once again into action if the hero appears midstream, as in Heart of Darkness. Yes, only experience can ferret out the anti-hero whose villainy now itself takes an inner turn. The garden cannot be recreated as the world entire, but perhaps it can be made into an occult cult. So when Martin Sheen encounters Marlon Brando, for example, we'll get to that in a moment. The garden cannot be recreated, but perhaps it can be made into some kind of hidden cult whose very premise flips its originating script. In this, the yet more contemporary hero may be seen as the defender of an ideal. Paradise is about eternal life, not its opposite, as Martin Sheen finds that Marlon Brando has created in the midst of what we are to take as a kind of primordial jungle in Apocalypse Now. The moment which rings of this truer ring occurs when Sheen shatters the weapon on the steps of the ancient temple. This is the same herald as did Utnapishtim give unto Gilgamesh himself. And in this, the exhortation to turn away from the corrupted wealth of the world with its faux babble of competing status and prestige. But wherever we ourselves may find our Kurtz, it is beginning to be more clear that the anti-hero rests closer to our own souls than we had heretofore imagined. This is thus the next step in the hero's journey. The essential conflict is not to be fought in the world, but rather in oneself. In Richard Strauss's Ein Heldenleben, A Hero's Life, part autobiographical and part transcendental, the hero's companion is fully real and indeed has become a necessary prerequisite for the completion of the quest. She is his life partner, and she dwells now in the world within Eros as critic, helpmeet, and muse. She will even fight beside him, though he must still take the lead in action itself. But very soon thereafter, with Virginia Woolf, the hero's companion is jaded by the general feature that her ideal is himself quite ordinary. Why not then take the heroic role for herself? First, however, we must establish that there can be a heroine. Perhaps oddly, it is in L. Frank Baum, wherein we find the first consistent contemporary female fantasy hero. That's something to think about, right? It's in the Baum Oz books. And one of the major reasons why they were banned for a time in certain regions was precisely because they had a lead as a young woman. Okay, the heroine idea was like, what? You can't do that. Okay. So, but in fact, Baum did do just that, and we owe him a debt. Anybody who writes now, including myself, using female leads, especially female heroines, owes L. Frank Baum a debt. That she is a tween-age twixt is no matter, for though there is blood in this still unique cycle, it is somewhat at arm's length, as it were. Political allegory of the day aside, the Oz canon contains the germs of otherworldly as lensed through the feminine, just as does Woolf contain the feminine as lensed through worldly action alone, bereft of the faith clinging to the now faithless hero, himself turned to a kind of mundane villainy through marriage, job, and fatherhood. It is perhaps somewhat pedantic to reiterate that the heroine must herself now undertake to replicate and indeed live through all of that which the hero had previously experienced, and this not only for her characterology, but also to gain purchase upon the quest in itself. And so we ourselves bear witness to a kind of replacement theory, excuse the term, in literature and entertainment alike, where the same old tropes are in ample evidence, and the only thing that is different is that the lead is female. Okay, one could, I dare say, accuse Margaret Atwood of doing something quite similar in the Penelopiad, or even in the much celebrated series that Robert Heinlein first introduced, although, again, then with a male hero. Okay, the novella If This Goes On is kind of the template, knowing or unknowing, for The Handmaid's Tale decades later. This is most definitely a ho-hum period, but likely a necessary one even so, for the heroine has herself never yet had the chance to test, and thence prove her mettle, against the many villainies yet extant in a world against which the entire history of heroism has fallen rather short. The incipient light begins to flicker across this perennial landscape when it is realized that heroines have existed, perhaps not forever, but indeed for some time, well back into the period which the hero has, as it turned out, falsely claimed as his own preserve. Take Hypatia, for instance, one of the great, if not the greatest female real heroine of all time. Okay, one of the most courageous human beings to ever have lived. She is the archetype here. Note immediately the crucial difference between the apicality of the hero and that of the heroine. The latter's origins are real. The authentic heroine is thus worldly. Her vision is not geared into immortality, the extension of life itself, and not so much about what that life either means or how it is to be known, but rather quality of life as lived. The heroine retains the critical sword of the hero, but runs its blade into a world structure. She is the re-evaluation of all values, whereas the hero believes in values. It's just that he's noticed that they've been corrupted. The heroine is at once more radical than her predecessor, for she has no truck with tradition as a concept, and less so. She is not out to overcome the world in favor of a metaphysic. She rather understands the transcendentalist as seeking to escape the world, which in itself cannot be saved. Though any ultimate soteriology is not her goal, she does seek improvement, and it is within this quest that we finally attain a sense that this idea of betterment is not at all an external feature of the narrative. We are belatedly brought into contact with the hero's inner journey. If the hero becomes a person through an acknowledgement of his own mortality, his is the altruism of the prophet and his message the promise of the prophecy, the heroine, in her turn, succeeds in her quest precisely by becoming her own person. We are now fully ensconced in our own anti-heroic days. In my own epics, the heroines not only are a coven, they express their covenant as a projection of intimate care upon the world. No longer is heroism distinct from villainy, for the means by which the quest is completed are themselves beyond good and evil. Even the concept of the just becomes liminal, a mobile threshold whereupon one is either immolated or overleaps the flame, pending circumstance, experience, and character. The fully contemporary heroine is not limited by either tradition, law, or daily custom, and yet she finds herself needing one or the other, neither as bulwark nor bastion, but instead as a manner of turning regression against itself. Her credo is not given, nor yet a given, but rather grown, and it is thus her quest to turn what at first is but bricolage into a superior way of being. Through this, she attains her own superiority as a selfhood, which is exposed persona as itself a form of villainy, and charisma as having been devolved to charm. And if Hypatia is her final muse, she has many role models, and is unafraid to take up the arms of the more recent heroes who themselves have begun to display the Aufheben of ethics in the face of all morality. For my own heroines, Forrester's Hornblower, Eastwood's Callahan, and even Thaw's Morse are among their lesser inspirations. If he can do that, so can I, she murmurs to herself. And so it is proved, with Riggs' Emma Peel, who remains the inaction archetype and who, though possessed by an immovable compass, provides her gender with the equipment to act in, if not, to alter the world. But the popular heroine is not enough, and this not only for herself. She knows that reiteration of the hero will only lead to further perenniality, and never to the worldly millennial, which is the maturation of the species being. Today's authentic heroine does not nurture the present, nor is she pregnant with its future, but rather, in anti-Caesarean seizure, upthrusts her sword through her own heart to blood the being of history which had been time, the essence of heroism which had been fate, and which is now made over into the soul alive with a simple courage, which both tasks and gifts are human days. Thank you.